So firstly and foremost, Happy New Year and lang may your lum week. And it's time for more pickups from yours truly here. And I've got about 6 generations of video game software over there ready to show you. And if you want to see what I've picked up over December and most of January now, you just wait until after these. As I said in the introduction, I've got a fair bit to get through here and I'm not going to waste too much time. I am going to stick to my usual format. I'm going to show you the newer games first and work back to that juicy retro at the end. And we're going to start with the first game I'm going to show you that I've picked up over the last couple of months, PlayStation 5, and I'll be honest with you, most of this is Sony today, and it is Port Royale 4. Now, I haven't had a chance to pop this into the PlayStation yet and give it its first spin through, but Port Royale, if you know me, you know I love my management games, and yes, Tootie, this is a management game, it's not a God Sim. God Sims are completely different things, and you can fight me down in the comments as usual, but I do love a good management sim game. I've loved them ever since the ZX Spectrum when I played things like A Rockstar Ate My Hamster, and I continued on through the early PC age with things like Sim City and Zeus Master of Olympus and many more. So I thought, why not get a consoleized version of Port Royale, pop it into the PlayStation and see if I can manage to manage this game on a controller. It's in the collection now where it's going to stay forever and of course get played. Well, if I can drag myself off Sid Meier's original Colonization, which was the forefather of these games, but Port Royale, happy to have it in the collection, really looking forward to seeing what the PlayStation 5 can bring to this style of management game. Next up, and still for the PlayStation 5, is a game that came out about 1.5 years ago, only came out digitally, and that's why I waited until there was a physical copy. So publishers, please take note, if it's not going to come out in physical, you're not going to get me interested. But the game for the PlayStation 5 that I picked up that was originally digital only is Alan Wake 2. Now, I'm not going to lie, I was super excited to hear that Alan Wake was going to get a sequel. Being the Sony pony that I am, I missed out on Alan Wake the first time round on the Xbox 360 and had to wait until the remaster of that game came out on a Sony system for me to play it. So hearing that Alan Wake was going to get a sequel, but then only to find out that Alan Wake 2 was going to be digital only, really disappointed me. Fortunately, however, the masses spoke and we did eventually get a physical release of Alan Wake 2. Now, I haven't played this yet, and I know that Gordon over at Gib84 Gaming will be a bit disappointed that I've had this for a few weeks now and haven't played it, but Gordon, I will get round to it. Alan Wake 2 into the collection, it will get played, and I can't wait to see what they've done with the story because the first game was absolutely phenomenal. Next up, still for the PlayStation 5, is a subset of games that I have a love-hate relationship with. I want to love them, I tend to hate them. That subset is Star Wars games, and I picked up for the PlayStation 5 Star Wars Outlaws. Now, as I said, and I'm going to make no bones about this, most Star Wars games, in my opinion, don't do any justice whatsoever to the franchise. There are a few exceptions, and I'm glad of those few exceptions, but every time a new Star Wars game is released, I'm filled with a bit of trepidation that these games are going to be bad. Now, I have managed to throw this into the PlayStation 5 and give it a couple of hours or so, and it's not too bad. I haven't put enough time into it to make a full decision whether I think it's a good game or not, but it certainly has potential. I know it got a lot of hate just after release, a lot of bugs, and we know what it's like with modern gaming. Games don't get released in their final form, usually anyway, and this one was no exception. It's obviously already been patched a fair bit, and what I did play of it, I found quite intriguing. So Star Wars Outlaws into the collection, and I've started playing it. I'll get back to it as soon as I can get off some of the other bigger JRPGs that I tend to put to the front of the list. But I'm glad it's here now, and I'll get this finished and let you know more about it later on. Next up, and still for the PlayStation 5, and it's one of those JRPGs that I've been talking about, and it's Sandland. Now, Sandland is an action JRPG, which is not normally my cup of tea, Don't get me wrong, there are a few action RPGs out there, action JRPGs, that I absolutely love and can play time and time again. I tend not to jump into them straight away, however. What really drew me into picking up Sandland, however, was it is based on an anime of the same name, and it's the same story. And as long as I'm sure that there's going to be a decent story attached to a game, whether it be action or turn-based RPG, then I'm definitely going to pick it up. Now, this one I did pick up in December. I have almost finished it, and let me tell you, it's far, far better than I ever expected it to be. Now, action RPG tends to be running about hack and slash with a sword. Well, that's how I see them anyway. With this one, you do have that option, but it also has vehicular combat, and that really intrigued me. And the more I got into the vehicular side of this game, the more I enjoyed it. So if you like an RPG and you like an action RPG and you want it to maybe have a Twisted Metal sort of twist to the game, then definitely have a look at Sandland for yourself. Graphics are fantastic, the gameplay is great, story's okay. I mean, it's a bit kiddie, I'm not going to lie to you there. It's a bit young, but that being said, a lot of animation and anime can be a bit young anyway, and as long as you enjoy the story, then what's the harm in it? So Sandland coming into the collection. I've almost completed this, and I heartily recommend, if you're into this style of game, then go and get yourself a copy of Sandland. Next up, and still for the PlayStation 5, is another JRPG, no surprises there, and it's a franchise of JRPGs that I absolutely love, well, maybe with the exception of the second installment, because I've finally picked up Dragon Age Veilguard. Now, as I said, I do absolutely love the Dragon Age games. I loved the first one, Dragon Age Origins, and all the DLC that came with it. It was one of the first games that I ever bought DLC for, which absolutely speaks volumes for someone who is maybe a little bit adverse to digital-only content. Dragon Age 2 was a little bit of a letdown. I did enjoy Inquisition, so I thought without a shadow of a doubt, when Dragon Age Veilguard came out, I would have to pick it up and give it its fair go. So here it is, Dragon Age Veilguard into the collection. Like the Star Wars Outlaws game, I've only put maybe an hour or two into this. I am enjoying what I've played of it so far, but we'll see how it develops as it goes on. So far, not as bad as Dragon Age 2, which that's a good thing, but it's in the collection now, and if it's something that you fancy, you know what, I think I can recommend this, not even just from my 2-hour experience, but from what I've heard from other people too. Next up, and still for the PlayStation 5, because there's a lot of PlayStation 5 as well as a lot of PlayStation in these pickups, is another JRPG. Now, this is a modern retro JRPG. This is a game that I've been looking forward to picking up physically for a long time now. I finally got it, because originally I played it digitally, and I don't mind that with indie games. I want to put that out there. If an indie developer doesn't have the resources to put out a physical game, fair enough, put it out digitally, get a market for it, and then get it out physically, which is what's happened here, because I finally got my hands on a physical Sea of Stars. Now, of course, at this point, I probably don't have to say too much about Sea of Stars, because if you're into video games, then you'll know about games like Sea of Stars. A wonderful retro throwback to JRPGs, lifting its themes and stylings from classic games such as Chrono Trigger and the first 6 Final Fantasy games, and it really is just a love letter to old school JRPG. So, as I said, if you know me, you know I love my JRPGs, and if you're watching this, you probably at least know about games like Sea of Stars, so I'm not going to rattle on too much about it. I'm so happy to have a physical copy into the collection where it will remain forever, and I'll be able to play it whenever I like, because I also have it digitally and I don't need to take the disc out the box, which will save the disc in the long run too. But Sea of Stars, it's a must have in anyone's collection, especially if you are a JRPG fan. Next up, and yes, we're still on the PlayStation 5, and yes, it's another JRPG. It's from one of the developers and publishers that I love the most when it comes to that particular genre, because it's an Atlas game, and it's Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. Now, I did pick up SMT5 way back out when it came out for the Nintendo Switch. I put maybe an hour or so into it, but I wasn't enjoying the controls using Joy-Cons at the time. So I set it aside because I knew I was going to upgrade the Joy-Cons, put on some Hori Split Pad Pros, where I would have a much more enjoyable experience playing a game that is quite action heavy. Because I don't know about you, but for me, the tiny little Joy-Con controls just don't do it for me. Now, I do have my Split Pad Pros on my Switch, but I didn't quite get round to putting the SMT5 back in. Hearing of course there was going to be a new version coming out on the PlayStation 5 in the form of Vengeance here, I decided just to set the Switch copy aside and get my hands on this eventually. Now I have started playing it and it's exactly so far like the game on the Switch, but with a much better controller. The Shin Megami Tensei games however are not for everyone because they're one of the toughest turn-based JRPGs that you're going to play, but also they're not extremely story heavy like the Persona series from Atlas, so there's a nice trade-off between difficult but not too complex of a story to try and keep up with too. But Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance into the collection. I've started playing it already because I do like to play more than one game at a time. Call me crazy if you want, but it's in the collection, it's being played, and I'll probably tell you more about it once I've finished the game. Next up, and take a guess, yes, still for the PlayStation 5 and another JRPG, but this time it's a little bit more retro than you might expect because it's Romancing Saga 2. Now I can't speak for you, but being a JRPG fan, especially one who's been a JRPG fan for decades, I am absolutely ecstatic about the fact that Square Enix and other developers too are putting time into HD 2D remakes and remasters of these classic JRPGs. Not just because they've got a nice new coat of paint or an easier way to play, a more accessible way to play on a modern console, but also some of these games that we didn't really get in Scotland or maybe even in the rest of Europe in some cases. And even when those games did release back in the day, they didn't release in great numbers, so it wasn't like your Tomb Raiders or your Resident Evils. When a JRPG come out, you maybe see it in your local shop. More than likely, you weren't going to see it. So a lot of these games that I missed back in the day, I can take a look at them now, not just by hunting down maybe an expensive PlayStation version, a retro PlayStation version, but now I have access to these games through modern remakes and remasters and sometimes just direct ports, which is fantastic too. And Romancing Saga 2 is one that I haven't played. I'm looking forward to getting this played, and it's probably going to be one of the next ones on the list, probably, but it's in the collection ready to go. And yes, next up is yet another PlayStation 5 game. It is another JRPG and it's another HD 2D remake because it's Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake. And this is a prime example of a game that I wouldn't have had back in the day. One, because this wasn't on a ZX Spectrum and I didn't really have Nintendo stuff at the time. And even when I moved on to consoles, it was the Sega Mega Drive. So this was a franchise that was totally going to pass me by. And to be frankly honest with you, when it comes to JRPGs, especially the holy trinity of Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy and Phantasy Star was the only one of that series that me, little old me here in Scotland, had any sort of access to. It's an absolute crying shame that the games companies back in the late 80s and early 90s didn't think that Europeans, or especially Scottish Europeans, would understand or get into these RPGs. What a market they missed out on, because we absolutely craved everything we could get in this genre. And yes, there's plenty of ways for me to play Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior 3, I suppose, if I got an American copy these days, but this is a much better way to play these games. Modern console, easy to pop in, easy to play. Yes, there's going to be some quality of life upgrades on it, and I know some people don't like this quality of life, but it's so important to have. If developers had the access to the technology that they have today, these quality of life improvements wouldn't be improvements, they'd be in the original games, trust me on that. So remaking these games now and maybe putting a little bit extra into them, making them a little bit more accessible, is such a wonderful thing that companies like Square are doing, and I've always been a fan of Square. And Dragon Quest III HD 2D remaster in the collection. Gonna get this played because the story is a prequel to 1 and 2, and I don't know if you know, but HD 2D remasters of 1 and 2 are coming out this year. Looking forward to being able to play all 3 of them. I'll get this story finished off first, and this is definitely the next one in the queue, and a lot of people have told me it better be anyway, so in the collection, going to get played. Next up, and you'll be glad to hear last for the PlayStation 5 pickups, it's another new game, but it's also a very old game, or should I say it's 3 old games, because I picked up the Tomb Raider trilogy. And again, I'm going to harp on about this. I love the fact that developers are going back to their older games. They're giving them either a fresh coat of paint or a complete reworking. But whatever way they do it, the fact that they're bringing back these classic games to modern consoles can only be applauded. And I hope this trend that I've noticed of people starting to complain about remakes, remasters and ports, no, stop that right away. These games, a lot of people didn't play them back in the day, or they did and they have no way of playing them now. And if companies are going to pump out games like this, then absolutely stand up, applaud them, let them bring out games like this. I mean, Aspyr are doing a decent job. They've been doing it for quite a while now. I'm currently playing Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, which was another Aspyr ported game, and now they've got this, and of course they've got that wonderful Blood Omen series under their belt as well. So Tomb Raider 1, 2 and 3 remastered. Can't wait to play this on the PlayStation 5. This one's sealed at the moment. It won't be sealed for too long, but I'm dying to play this on a PlayStation 5, and so should you. So next up, we're moving down a generation onto the PlayStation 4. I said it was going to be PlayStation heavy. I am a Sony pony at heart, and when it push comes to shove, I'm going to pick up Sony games before I pick up other games usually, but we're onto the PlayStation 4. And the first game I'm going to show you for the PlayStation 4, and the only game I'm going to show you for the PlayStation 4, is Catherine Full Body. Now, anyone who knows me knows I already have this game in my collection. This, however, is the Day 1 Steelbook edition, and it's absolutely glorious. It's the only reason that I picked it up. I still haven't played the game, I'll be frankly honest with you, and yes, that's a bit shocking considering it's an Atlas published game. I'm a big fan of Atlas, but it's just a game I haven't got round to yet. And picking it up for the second time might seem a little bit crazy, but I do have a soft spot for steelbooks, and especially steelbooks that look as good as this, because the love and attention that goes into the artwork is just phenomenal. And you know what, if anyone out there needs a copy of Catherine Full Body in the PlayStation 4, not the Steelbook edition, just send me a little message and I'll send it your way, because I really don't need it. So Catherine Full Body, this wonderful launch edition that came in a spectacular Steelbook, into the collection, and I promise I will get round to playing it. I promise I will. Honest, you just watch this space. So yes, we're moving straight down a generation now, and we're going on to the PlayStation 3. I have neglected the PlayStation 3 a fair bit over the last maybe 3 or 4 years, haven't put a lot of time and effort into it, which is a crying shame because it's such a good generation. It's the last time we had a proper jump as far as I'm concerned anyway. But onto the games, and the first one that I picked up is a game I've been hunting for a long time. It's not a rare game by any means, but just getting one in the condition I wanted, and that game is Blur. Now, as I said, Blur isn't a rare game by any stretch of the imagination. It's not an expensive game, but it's a game that I just never see out in the wild. Now, yes, I could just go on to the likes of eBay and pick up a copy that was listed as complete, but I don't know whether it's just because I'm old-fashioned or not. I like to have a game in my hand before I decide to make the purchase, and it's not like I was in any great hurry to pick it up. I mean, don't get me wrong, when I'm buying a brand new game, I will order it online to get it delivered the day of release, but that's a completely different thing. That's not a collection thing, that's just purely I need to play that game as soon as possible thing. So for the likes of Blur, I've been happy to wait until I could see a decent copy out in the wild, fully complete, that could sit in the collection, and of course I'll get to play it. I never pick up any games that I don't intend to play, and Blur is one I've been looking forward to playing for a while. For anyone who doesn't know by now, it's a sort of realistic Mario Kart, or that's the impression I get from the gameplay I've seen and what people have said. But it's here now, into the collection, where it will stay forever, and finally I'll be able to play my own copy of Blur. Next up, and still for the PlayStation 3, and another game that I already have in the collection, but it was another Steelbook, people, and it's Gran Turismo 6. Now again, I don't need to talk too much or anything at all about Gran Turismo 6 or any of the series. It's a fantastic racing series, I absolutely love it. I was one of the many millions of people who absolutely loved the first game when it was released, and I continue to enjoy the series as it went on. This, of course, I'm only picking up for one reason. As you already know, much like Catherine, or exactly like Catherine, this was a lovely example of the Steelbook, which you don't see a lot out there, certainly not out in the wild, and I've got it for absolutely absolute pennies. Absolute pennies. I'll tell you how much I got it for. £6 British sterling. So I couldn't resist picking that up. I would have picked it up anyway regardless of price, because I am an absolute sucker for a steelbook. And yes, it does mean that I have a copy of Gran Turismo 6 sitting in the collection that I don't need anymore, because I won't keep any more than one copy of a game. And if you fancy a copy of that and you want to just drop down into the comments, let me know. I'll pass it on to you, because I only need one copy, and now this is my copy. Next up and last up for the PlayStation 3 pickups is an RPG, a JRPG that I haven't played, don't have in the collection, and this is a lovely addition that I've managed to pick up, and it is Tales of Gracie's F. Now, the Tales series is a series that I haven't put much time into at all. The only Tales game that I've ever played is Tales of Arise, and I'll be frankly honest with you, I found that one a bit meh. Now, I don't know whether or not I wasn't in the right mindset with the game at the time, but at the time of playing, I just found it a bit lightweight, but that was maybe just me and not the game. I do, however, like to give games another chance, and I will give Tales of Arise another chance, but I also like to go back, especially when I've missed them in the past, and pick up earlier games in a franchise, and that is one of the reasons that I picked up Tales of Gracie's F. Now, I have seen this game out in the wild a fair bit and haven't picked it up until just now, and I think the reason this one pushed me over the edge is because this one came complete. It's some sort of collector's edition by the looks of things. Got some nice little bits inside it like art books and CDs, and when you see something like that out in the wild, then you definitely have to pick it up, especially when it's in decent condition, and you know it's coming into a collection where it will be loved forever, and that's where Tales of Gracie's F will be going into my collection, where it will be played and it will be loved forever. So tell me down in the comments whether this is a better Tales than Tales of Arise. So we're moving away from PlayStation 3, but we're only going down what I would like to call half a generation, because we're going on to the PSP. I don't pick up a lot of PSP, but I did see this boy out in the wild and I just had to pick it up, and you'll know why when you see it, because it's Dissidia 012 Final Fantasy. Now, of course, if you're watching me and you've watched me for any length of time, you will know that Final Fantasy is up there on a pedestal when it comes to franchises and video game history for me. So anything at all that carries the weight of the Final Fantasy name will make its way into my collection, even if it's a god-awful Final Fantasy 16. And I'll be completely honest with you, I have very little experience when it comes to the Dissidia game, so I really don't know what I'm getting myself into. What I do know, however, is a wonderful sort of collector's edition. It comes complete with a slipcase and the selection of oversized postcards in the inside. So for me, there was absolutely no way I was walking out of that shop without buying this thing here. No way whatsoever. So Dissidia 012 and Duodecim, whatever that is, Final Fantasy, into the collection. I'll give it a spin on my Final Fantasy 7 PSP at some point, and maybe let you know if I like this particular offshoot of Final Fantasy as well. Now, that was the only PSP game, so we're moving down a generation fully onto the PlayStation 2, and the first thing I'm going to show you is a little bit of hardware. Now, this one obviously wasn't out in the wild. I just managed to stumble across this on eBay, but I had to pick it up because it was really inexpensive, and it's a Hori branded PS2 memory card, and as you can see, Suikoden 4. And of course I was going to pick this up because Suikoden 4 is one of my favourite games of all time. It's from one of my favourite series of all time. As anyone who knows, Suikoden and Final Fantasy both sitting up there on that pedestal for me. And when I saw this little thing here, I mean, why not? Why not just pick up a little Hori third-party PlayStation 2 memory card that's Suikoden branded? So, into the collection, no doubt about it. But let's move on to the games. Now, the first game that I picked up for the PlayStation 2, I've really picked this up because of the hype surrounding the newest of the games in this particular franchise, and the game that I picked up was Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. Now, I didn't play many Indiana Jones games back in the day because I played some of the earliest Indiana Jones games back in the day. And we're talking about games like The Last Crusade and The Temple of Doom on the ZX Spectrum and the like. It can completely put you off a franchise, which is a bit of a shame because you know what? I've given this one a little bit of a spin and it does have some interesting ideas. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the controls are maybe a little bit clunky and there's maybe a little bit of jank when it comes to the gameplay. but they were definitely onto something when they made this game. Now, I haven't played a great deal of it. I've played through maybe the first couple of chapters, but there was enough in that short time to show me that there was at least a very solid idea when they were putting this game together. And yes, I'm probably going to finish this game, which is quite rare when it comes to a game that's not an RPG for me. I tend to use games like this as a dip in and just play, just as a palate cleanser. But this one, I think I'd actually like to get to the end of the story of it. Now, as I said, there's a bit of clunk and there's a bit of jank, but it's not too bad. And I think once I get used to the clunk of the controls, then I'll slip back into it. I mean, I did play Resident Evil back in the day with tank controls, that along with Dino Crisis and the rest. And kids these days just can't play games with tank controls, and to me they're almost like second nature. So I will persevere with Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. I've enjoyed what I've played of it so far, and with the new game, well, I'm going to call it the new game because it doesn't come out on a Sony system until spring, but with the new Indiana Jones game coming out, I thought I'd look at some of the Indiana Jones games that I missed back in the day, but this is in the collection now, where it will remain forever, and this is one that will definitely get finished. Next up, and still for the PlayStation 2, is another licensed game, and I do like a good licensed game as much as I like a bad licensed game, especially when it comes from a license that I absolutely adore. And this one comes from the 1990s, and it's X-Files: Resist or Serve. Now, I haven't played this game yet because the only X-Files game that I've played was the X-Files game on the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, the PS1 if you must. And that wasn't probably the best game that was ever put out on the system. A point and click game that was a bit clunky and a bit janky and not too great when it came to serving this wonderful franchise. Now, that's not to say that the first game put me off buying Resist or Serve on the PlayStation 2. It's just a game that I haven't seen out in the wild that I've been able to pick up. But of course, like most things when it comes to video games, if you're out there looking for it hard enough, you'll finally come across it, and the X-Files: Resist or Serve has made its way into my collection, where it will get played, it will get compared against the X-Files game on the PS1, and we'll see if it's any good. And I don't care if it's bad, because I do like a bad licensed game as well. Next up for the PlayStation 2 is another licensed game, but this one did have a bit of critical acclaim, and the game is a game that I should have picked up a long time ago because I quite like this, not just the franchise itself that it comes from, but I like this style of game from this era because it's The Godfather. Now, the reason that I haven't picked up The Godfather before this is quite simply because I just haven't really been thinking about it. However, this particular version, as you can see, came as a wonderful steelbook, and there's nothing out there on the shelves that will sing to me quite like a steelbook. And not only that, it's a limited edition version, it's in really good condition, and it has all those limited edition goodies inside. So The Godfather, coming into the collection for the first time, I'm sure I'm going to enjoy this. I enjoy the Mafia games, and I would imagine this is going to be very, very similar. So The Godfather, wonderful limited edition steelbook, into the collection, where it will stay and probably get played pretty soon as well because of the style of game it is. Next up for the PlayStation 2 is another licensed game, but this is yet another one that has a bit of kudos about it because I managed to pick up this limited edition of Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, I'll be completely honest with you, until Spider-Man in 2018, the wonderful game put together by Insomniac, I had very little interest in superhero games. And that's just probably because I didn't really grow up with comic books in Scotland back in the 70s and 80s. It was just something that we didn't do. It wasn't a medium that we were exposed to, so I don't think we quite had the passion for it back then. Of course, as the years have went on, I have developed a love for superheroes from comic books of all generations, and Spider-Man is certainly one of the ones up there that translates really well into video games, and the 2018 game is an absolutely phenomenal game, and I don't think anyone will argue with that. So when I saw this wonderful Ultimate Spider-Man sitting out there on my local shop shelf, there was no way I was not going to pick it up, and just simply because of the way it looks as much as anything else. But this is in the collection now. It will get played. As I says, I don't pick up any games that I don't intend to play. But let me know if this should be sooner rather than later, or can it just look pretty on the shelf for a while. Ultimate Spider-Man, sitting in the collection until you tell me to play it. Next up for the PlayStation 2 is another subset that I absolutely love to collect for, and it's something that you don't see much of, or almost at all these days, because that's compilation discs. And I picked up the Namco Museum 50th Anniversary And yes, without a doubt, absolutely love these compilation games of classic arcade games rammed onto one disc that you can sit and play, and the Namco Museum 50th Anniversary disc is certainly one of the best ones out there. When you've got games like Pac-Man, Dig Dug, Galaxian, Pole Position, Xevious, Dragon Spirit, Rolling Thunder, Mappy, Sky Kid, it's absolutely packed with fantastic games from the arcade era, the era that I grew up with in arcade, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have this particular one in the collection. This is one that I don't see a lot. I mean, this is probably the first time that I've seen the 50th Anniversary collection out in the wild, and yes, you can go to eBay and other online vendors, but I like to get a game in my hands. I like to have a look at the condition of the disc, the manual, and everything else before, because yes, I'm a gamer and I only buy games that are going to be played, but I also keep them. So I'm a gamer who collects, and if you collect, you want the best example you can get your hands on. It's as simple as that. So I'm ecstatic to have this lovely condition Namco Museum 50th Anniversary in the collection, where I'll be able to dip into many arcade games that I played back in the day as palate cleansers before I move on to the next big 100-hour JRPG. So fantastic, and I'm so happy to have this one in the collection now. Next up, and for the PlayStation 2, but not for the PlayStation 2 PAL, but for the PlayStation 2 NTSC Jai for Japan. It's the first ever Japanese PlayStation 2 game that I'll ever have in my collection, that I will ever have in my collection, and I didn't buy it. It was a gift from a friend who came across this and says, I saw this and I thought you might like it, and it's a Shining Force on the PlayStation 2. Now, I can't tell you anything about Shining Force on the PlayStation 2 because I've never played it in the PlayStation 2, only ever the Mega Drive. I do have the Mega Drive 2 Mini, which has the Shining Force CD for the Sega CD, but I haven't played that yet, but I'm imagining it's pretty much the same as Shining Force on the Mega Drive or Genesis. But Shining Force on the PlayStation 2, I have absolutely no idea. Might do a little research into it. I can imagine it didn't come out in PAL territories, but I don't know for sure. You can let me know that in the comments. Save me jumping on Google and finding out, but it's a safe thing to assume because, as I said previously, it took quite a while for Japanese role-playing games to make it to Europe. They made it to North America far sooner than they made it to Europe, and that still boggles my mind to this day. But now have a copy of Shining Force for the PlayStation 2 in my hand. Yes, Japanese copy. I will need to get a Japanese machine to play it on. I don't think it would work on an NTSC American machine, which I have access to, but if anything else, it's just a lovely little collector's piece. So this is pretty much an ornament, but it will give me a rabbit hole to jump down and try and find out about Shining Force on the PlayStation 2, because that I would definitely have been all in on. Next up and last up for the PlayStation 2 is a game that I've been looking to get into the collection now. This is a franchise that I love from a developer I love. It's of course Atlas, and it's Persona 3 on the PlayStation 2. Now yes, this is a slightly bigger hitter of a game. It's one that I've been looking to get into the collection because I absolutely fell in love with the Persona series just after playing Persona 5. Yes, I was a late adopter, but once it adopted me into its ecosystem, there was no way that I wasn't going back and playing the rest of them. And not only playing the rest of them, I was going to have to get them into the collection. Now unfortunately, this one here is without manual, which slightly irks me. It doesn't irk me too much because, as I say, I'm a gamer first before a collector. I will be looking for a manual for this. I'm sure I'll be able to pick up one at some time. And if not, I'll probably just pick up another copy that has a manual in it and then move on a copy that doesn't have a manual. You know how we work when we're collecting things and we want them complete. There's ways and means of doing it. Of course, if you know anyone who's selling a decent copy of the manual for Persona 3, drop that down into the comments, and if it's a reasonable price, I'll be more than happy to pick it up. But Persona 3 for the PlayStation 2 into the collection, really happy to have this one in. Worth every penny that I paid for it, even if it doesn't have a manual, but it will be loved forevermore. Next up, we're moving down a generation, so away from the PlayStation 2 and onto the original PlayStation. And the first game that I'm going to show you here is a game that I didn't buy for myself. It was a gift from the wonderful Gordon over at Gibby84 Gaming, and he sent me along, complete in box, Front Mission 3. Now, Front Mission 3 means nothing to me because I have never played a single Front Mission game. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate it, I absolutely do, and it doesn't mean that I won't play it because I absolutely will. My worry is though that I'm going to enjoy Front Mission 3 and Gordon's just sent me down another rabbit hole of a selection of video games to collect. And not just for the sake of collecting, for playing them, because I know a lot of people out there seem to really enjoy the Front Mission games. So Gordon, thank you very much for the kind gift, and if you've sent me down a rabbit hole, I'll have words with you later. But it's wonderful to have this into the collection and start my Front Mission journey, and maybe it'll end with this one, maybe not. Let me know down in the comments whether you think it'll end with Front Mission 3 or will I be going back to the first two and moving on to the later games as well. Next up, and still for the PlayStation 1, is a game that I did buy for myself this time. It's a subset that I want to collect for myself, and that subset is the first 10 games that was released for the PAL PlayStation collection, and I have game number 7, Air Combat. Now, Air Combat was a game that I didn't play back in the day, which is quite surprising because I did like early Air Combat dogfighting styles of games. I played the absolute hell out of Red Baron by Dynamics back in the early 90s, and before that, any sort of dogfighting game was definitely my cup of tea. I think by the time that I had moved on to the PlayStation in 1996, I was definitely looking for much bigger narrative driven games. I was looking for things that were going to give me much more of an experience than an arcade fun experience. So Air Combat, although it wasn't a game that I had back in the day, it's definitely a game that I would have played back in the day. And of course, I've decided on this first 10 subset, and this is game number 7, not my 7th game in the list. I don't even remember how many I've got now, but I know this is one more that's coming off that list. But Air Combat into the collection, and that's one more of the first 10 PAL games off this subset. And I don't know why I started. I know why I started it. I'm going to mention them again. It's Tootie. Not only is he ragging on me about God games and management games, but he's ragging on me about giving me information about games having numbers at the bottom. Don't do that, Tootie. Don't tell me they're numbered, because the OCD will kick in like it has here. Aye, Air Combat, a game that I might never have picked up, but the fact that it's 00007, thank you very much, Tootie, but it's in the collection now. Next up, we're moving right down the generations because we're moving on to 8-bit, because we're moving on to the ZX Spectrum, and in a game that I didn't pick up for myself. It was another gift, a gift from the wonderful Russ over at Retro Bear. No, actually not just Russ over at Retro Bear, but Retro Repair Bear, the wonderful Mrs. Bear, who does some wonderful work. And if you're looking for any work done on your retro, or I would imagine many different consoles of different eras, then please give Mrs. Bear over at Retro Repair Bear a look, because the work she does is absolutely fantastic. And eventually I'll probably send her some work from me as well once I can get things organised. But enough of that. The gift, the game that they sent, a wonderful game. No, The Simpsons, Bart Simpson versus the Space Mutants, and as anyone knows, this game is not a good game, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It was just a really hard 8-bit game, and everybody who played it, whether you were on the NES or the Master System, probably the Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, whatever you played it on, this game was absolutely brutally hard and very unfair, especially when it came to the colour clash, however, on the ZX Spectrum, because one of the gameplay mechanics is you have to find everything purple and change it to its normal colour, and when you've got colour clash on a ZX Spectrum, you just never know what colours you're facing or where they're actually meant to be sometimes. It is, however, an absolutely wonderful gift. I don't buy a lot of original ZX Spectrum stuff, just little pieces now and again, and they have to be good pieces. They have to be good looking pieces, important games, even if they're important games that were hated at the time. So this is a wonderful addition into my collection, my Omega collection, which will be with me until I go. So thank you again, Russ and Mrs. Bear, for this wonderful gift. And oh, I'll mention this because playing this game is going to be brutal. I'll need something just to keep me centred, so I've got this wonderful little Retro Repair Bear that will sit and keep me company and comfort me through the long hard hours of trying to work out where exactly the purple is on Bart versus the Space Mutants on the ZX Spectrum. So there you go, my friends, that was my pickups over most of December and most of January. And what did you think of them? Yes, there was a lot of modern stuff, but a lot of modern retro stuff, and a fair bit of regular retro stuff as well. Any of these games that you've played back in the day that you absolutely love, any of the newer games that you think you might want to pick them up now, any of those games that you want to see fired into the sun and forgotten forever, drop down into the comments, let me know, because interaction between you and me, well, that's what makes YouTube special. It does for me anyway. Thank you very much as always for watching, and until next time, of course, cheerio.